So, I've finally gotten my RTX 4090 and 4080 testing done while I continue to test many other graphics cards this month before Christmas break. And yeah, I'm really excited to talk about these cards and actually to compare them against the RTX 4070 Ti and RDNA 3, RX 7900 XT, and XTX releases coming soon, since I got a few of my contacts and sources to directly give me performance data for upcoming products. So, in other words, this video isn't just looking at the RTX 4090 Supreme Liquid, nor just the 4080 Founders next to it. It's also looking at what you can expect out of the 4070 Ti and RDNA 3 releases coming out very soon. This video aims to answer the question, what high-end cards from both companies are for who, for which shoppers, this year and into 2023. And look, first, let's talk about the cards I physically have in my house. An RTX 4090 Supreme Liquid, which Silver Knight PCs set aside for me in exchange for a series of ads this holiday season, both to promote their company and because they felt bad that a previous collaboration we were going to do fell through. You see, I was going to send them my MSI RTX 3090 Aero for a fan replacement and tune-up 3 or 4 months ago now. They wanted to see this unicorn blower 3090 that we both believe was never sold within the United States be a fun project for them, and I wanted to see how much thermals could be improved on a 3090 blower card with a brand new fan, thermal pads, and thermal paste, and then USPS lost it. Yep. Not kidding. I did get a partial refund, but no, I'm not happy with how that aspect of this story turned out. And I just would remind everybody, thank God I had some insurance on the card. And if you send something expensive, make sure you put shipping insurance on it. And I don't know, it was a rare card though, so even if I got all of my money back, I'd be upset. And well, at the very least, though, it's turned out for the best because Silver Knight PCs felt so bad that they decided to sponsor me with a 4090 Supreme Liquid that I could keep in exchange for ads. And actually, before sending me the 4090, they upgraded the thermal paste and thermal pads, which you can watch this process and a link in the description. And yeah, so it's working out. I needed a beefy new graphics card, not really for gaming, but for rendering videos for all of you viewers. And I was tired of gaming on this RTX 3050 for over a month, although I did make do. And yeah, I'm also just very, very happy to be sponsored by Silver Knight PCs. Anyways, the owner of the company actually was on Broken Silicon a little over a year ago, having a frank discussion. You know, check out Silver Knight PCs. They really came through for Moore's Law is Dead when this channel needed it. And yeah, they came through with that 4090, which let's actually start talking about this awesome card that Silver Knight PCs provided me. So yeah, the 4090 Supreme Liquid from MSI, this cooler is truly premium and professional looking. Both. And I believe that it makes the heavier and just inferior Founders cooler just look absolutely silly, especially on a card like the 4080 that is significantly weaker than the 4090. Remember, the 4090 and the 4080 use the exact same reference cooler, and so getting to look at a 4080 cooler lets me tell you what I think about the 4090 Founders, which, look, it feels premium, but it's really heavy, and I can tell you that the MSI Supreme Liquid is definitely cooler. Yeah, my 4090 runs cooler than my 4080, even when using 50% more energy. And it's much quieter. And it has less coil whine too, which let me actually expand on those points I just brought up. You see, the Supreme Liquid, despite having a radiator, as long as you have a 240mm radiator spot in your case, it was much less cumbersome and easier to put into my case. And the Founders, I don't think I could fit it in my case with the side closed. Now, if I were to get a 90-degree native Gen 5 cable, I think that would have done the trick, but you don't need that with the Supreme Liquid because MSI thought ahead. They actually left a little cutout in the card so the 16-pin adapter doesn't jut out as much. That was really good thinking by MSI. And then the Founders cooler is also heavier for no reason, and I just think it could be cooler. Like, here's me benchmarking Assassin's Creed Valhalla. It's often at 57 degrees at most, even when I overclock the 4080. Now, you might go, that's good. No, they're making you pay at least $100 more than you need to for a ridiculously expensive cooler for no reason. Again, just to make this card feel like it's high-end when it isn't as high-end as they're making it out to be. It is a high-end card, but not that high-end. And the Coil Whine. I need to talk about the Coil Whine here because I think this is going to be a factor that comes up more and more in high-end releases moving forward throughout the years. Seriously, here I am playing Age of Empires 4 in 4K at around 120 Hz and higher, and I'm hearing this noise while panning around. Seriously, it gets bad coil whine above 120 Hz in a lot of games, and even in some games at 120 Hz, whereas my 4090 doesn't really have bad coil whine until you get to about 200 Hz in some games, which is kind of also an issue as well, I gotta say. Not for me. I don't game above 200 Hz. I overclocked my monitor to 132 Hz, but I think a lot of people soon will. There are 240 Hz monitors coming out more and more every day. We see 500 Hz and 600 Hz monitors on the horizon, and with how easy 4K is to run and stronger CPUs coming out every year, I can't help but think that both AMD and Nvidia are going to have to put a lot more effort into making coil whine not be there at frame rates a lot of displays can just do now. But I digress. I think I've said enough about the 4080 Founders and the 4090 Supreme Liquid coolers. The 4090 Supreme Liquid cooler is a dream cooler. Can't say more than that. It outperformed all expectations I had. And the 4080 Founders cooler / 4090 Founders cooler, it's really powerful, but it is too bulky in my opinion, too heavy, just way overpowered for a 4080, and it could have been quieter for how cumbersome it is. But yeah, let's get into the benchmarks, and I'm going to start with a resolution that I want to get out of the way immediately because it's a waste of time to be benchmarking at this point, in my opinion, with half of the new releases. 1080p. I benchmarked on an i7-13700K Raptor Lake system, and yeah, you can see here that above about a 3090's level of performance, everything just starts blending together. Basically, even some of the latest games start becoming coil whine testers, even at higher settings. And if I pull out games that weren't part of this average, but I still benchmark just out of curiosity, like Strange Brigade, a game that was a pretty popular benchmark game. I thought it was a fun game too, and it's over almost 4 years old. You can see here that in 1080p, everything is overkill at a certain point, and the latest cards are all exhibiting horrible coil whine while you're gaming here. And then if I go into 4K, it's actually still pretty heavy overkill to have any of the latest releases. And I think that puts things in perspective here, right? If you're gaming on mostly older games, all of the latest cards are crazy powerful. And even in 4K, you're going to be able to game above 200 Hz with even a lot of last-gen, high-end, not even flagship graphics cards. Also, I started with Strange Brigade here because I thought it was a good transition into what we're going to see with my other testing. You see, what you're seeing here is basically how I think you should think about the 4080 versus the 4090. Don't get me wrong, and this did surprise me a little bit. The 4080 feels distinctly stronger than last gen. I wasn't confusing it with the 3090. It was really, really powerful in 4K. Probably about a tier and a half better than a 3090, which makes it about a tier better than a 3090 Ti. Not half a tier, a full tier better than a 3090 Ti. But the 4090 was a solid 1.5 to 2 tiers better than that. There is absolutely no confusing these cards, even if Nvidia gave them the same cooler to confuse you while you're shopping. Although shoppers seem to have just rejected the 4080, so it didn't really work, Nvidia. But alright then, let's move on to 4K gaming. So, first I'm going to pull up Division 2 results with settings turned up to levels that I'd probably not even turn up that much just because I can't tell the difference between some of the useless top settings. And you can see, even at ridiculous settings, the RTX 4090 MSI Supreme Liquid is just crushing this game well above what my monitor can even display. And then the 4080 skates by as a solid 4K 120Hz card. But again, like a 4K 120Hz card, not a 4K 170Hz card. It is distinctly better than the 3090, but distinctly weaker than the 3090 as well. And then Assassin's Creed Valhalla, again, a similar pattern here. The 4090 giving you more performance than you really need, while the 4080 kind of makes the argument it's a solid new 4K 120Hz card, but not comparable to the 4090 at all. Really shouldn't be priced even remotely close to it. And then let's just get right to the 4K relative performance averages, and we can see that compared to a 3090, I indeed found in my testing, and all of these cards were tested on the same system. I did test the 3090 before USPS lost it, by the way. We find that the 4090 is roughly double the performance of a 3090, like I leaked it was, and like I think most people should have expected based on the specs. If you overclock it, it gets a little over double. If you leave it at, around where I have it capped at 351 watts, which I do keep it capped at while I'm gaming, it's almost double the performance. But on that note, actual power consumption levels I limit the card to, actual gaming frame rates I've capped my monitor at. This is the part of the video where I'd usually transition into qualitative benchmarks. I showed you the raw numbers. You've seen how the cards literally line up. What does it feel like to game with a 4080 and a 4090? Well, I'm going to talk about this a little bit, but I'm not going to show as much real gameplay on screen in this review as I usually do, because I don't see there really being a point. You see, pretty much every game I own, whether it's from a year ago, this year, or 3 or 4 years ago, I just crank up the settings and I run 4K, maxing out the refresh rate of my monitor. It was so consistent that I looked into overclocking my monitor, and I could. I overclocked my 4K monitor from 120 to 132 hertz, and then I just cap every game now at 130 hertz with VSync off to get that, zero screen tearing like G-Sync experience, and it's great. It's absolutely fantastic. Like when I'm playing Modern Warfare 2 in online games with dozens of players in the room, like one of those massive game modes they now have as standard in Call of Duty games, I am gaming at 4K 130 100% locked the entire time while using 220 to 250 watts. To put that in perspective, that's about the same power consumption my overclocked 3070 Founders got last year, and it would have been performing about half to a third as well while using the same energy. The RTX 4090 is incredibly efficient. Now, what about the 4080? Because I've seen a lot of people talk about how that's an efficient graphics card. Well, first of all, I could still run Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2 online at 130 hertz locked, and actually won a Warzone with Dan while using it, which was fun. Instead of running at 60 to 70% usage with a 4090, I ran at 85 to 95% usage. And that's it. They were both using about the same amount of energy. Maybe on average, it seemed like the 4080 was using 5% less power, but that's it. Now, in response to what I just said, that the 4080 and the 4090 with a capped frame rate, they use about the same amount of energy, some might say, well, if you're just gaming at 4K 120 hertz or 1440p, really anything hertz at this point, then the 4080 is enough. And that's kind of true. But it's funny. If the 4080 was $900 or less and came with a less than 3-slot cooler, it just used dual 8-pin connectors, which it totally could have, by the way. It does not need a 16-pin. I would have told most people to save money and not bother with the 4090. Honestly, I would have. But it isn't those things. The 4080 is most of the cost of the 4090. The 4080 has a third less RAM than the 4090, and the 4080... it's just as big and hard to fit in your case. Actually, the 4080 Founders I have was harder to fit in my case than a 4090, which is just stupid. It's seriously stupid. And so it really doesn't matter who you are. If you're a gamer going all out, then the 4090 is better. If you're someone who wants to save energy or has a smaller PC, the 4080 isn't easier to fit in the case. And so while some people might say if the 4080 is enough, save money, other people, include me in with these people, would say, you're not saving that much getting a 4080. You're not saving that much money to total system cost. It's just as big, it's just as cumbersome, and it's actually less efficient if you were to both cap them at like 250 watts. I keep my RTX 4090 with a 351 watt TDP limit, and it's usually gaming around 300 watts or lower, just like my 4080 is usually gaming around 300 watts or lower. And during the summer, if it gets hot up here, well, maybe I'll cap the power consumption at 250 or 200 watts. And I'll do so knowing that my 4090 is performing still 20% better than an uncapped 4080 at 300 watts or more. So I'll just be happier with a colder room because I paid a little more, relatively speaking, for the 4090. And at this point, then I'll say it. I see no argument for getting a 4080 over a 4090, not at its current price of $1,200 or higher. Again, if it was half as big as the 4090, if it costs less than $1,000, I would actually recommend the 4080 to most people because it is still kind of overkill most of the time, but I think they could have charged more than the 3080's MSRP. It is pretty powerful and more efficient, like crazy efficient, but not $1,200. It should have been $800 to $1,000, and then I think the 4080 would have sold out as fast as the 4090. And actually, let me get to this here. I'm actually told that, yeah, you're not crazy. A lot of people are choosing RDNA 2 cards over the 4080. And I am told that actually AMD is managing to sell through their old RDNA 2 stock probably by the end of this quarter. Seriously, I have someone at AMD saying they managed to just about sell through their remaining stock. I've got someone at a major retailer today who updated me saying that the RDNA 2 Navi 21 and 22 cards are sold out at all of their locations and they can't order more. It seems like AMD was successful in getting rid of RDNA 2 stock, that a lot of people chose 6900 XTs over 4080s that cost twice as much, and that now nothing's stopping AMD from shipping a ton of RDNA 3 cards next year and maybe teaching Nvidia a lesson with what they've done with the 4080. But yeah, now we're on the subject of AMD. What about RDNA 3 performance? Actually, what about 4070 Ti performance? Well, I have been talking to a handful of sources at AIBs that finally have had some time with 7900 XTs and XTXs with launch day drivers, and I also have a few reviewers who have been testing these cards. And look, most of my contacts gave me rough estimates or told me if the estimates other people told me were off or not, but one reviewer was willing to just give me all of their charts early. And well, yeah, I would like to then leak rough RDNA 3 performance for you all today next to the 4080 and 4890 and 4070 Ti. All right, so let's pull these up, and as you can see, I decided to leave overclocking results for the cards I tested personally out of the equation here because the RDNA 3 cards were not overclocked, and I didn't make it easy to see the exact percentage differences between these cards because, to be honest, I had a handful of data from a smorgasbord of sources and then a lot of data from one source. But I guess what I'm saying is this. I've seen a lot of interesting results with RDNA 3 testing from the one source that gave me all of their testing data. In one game in 1080p, I saw the 7900 XT, not XTX, beat the 4090. And in 1440p, in a popular 1440p game, I also saw the 7900 XT beat a 4090. But I've also seen the 7900 XTX lose to the 4080 in one game in 1440p. So the truth is just this. This is the rough average I have here, but it's not from like a handful of reviewers that gave me their full data, so I'm leaving specific percentages out of it. This is just a rough look at what you should expect next week, and what you should expect is that on average, the 7900 XTX definitely beats the 4080 in raw raster, but I do think that it's going to lose by a notable amount in ray tracing when that is turned on in games, and that the 7900 XT just flat out loses to the 4080, unfortunately. Meanwhile, I used Nvidia's own released benchmarks for the 4080 12GB to be used in place for a 4070 Ti, and then also the specs differences in teraflops and bandwidth between the 4080 12GB and the 4080 16GB, and averaged all of those together to get what I believe will be close to 4070 Ti performance. And so, yeah, I do expect the 7900 XT to beat the 4070 Ti solidly. So, what do I say about these results right here? I think that the people that continue to hype up RDNA 3 performance as being triple or quadruple the performance of RDNA 2 are going to look extra dumb next week. Dumber than anyone could have conceived of. But at the same time, I don't know. I do keep hearing that both AIBs and then AMD themselves are working on higher clocked variants of Navi 31. And so they should be able to get close to double the performance of a 6900 XT, not a 6950 XT, in raw rasterization at some point next year. And that even maybe an RDNA 3 Plus is coming as well near the end of next year. But guys, right now, AMD doesn't have a card that doubles 6900 XT performance. They don't. And it's time to admit to ourselves that they don't. But is that all bad news? Well, there's no such thing as bad products, just bad pricing. So let me actually put the pricing on screen for these products and make it clear on which ones I think are good and which ones suck, right? So I think what becomes clear right away is that AMD is not being a charity with RDNA 3 products, right? They're pricing them where they think they need to move units. But at the same time, they are pricing them adequately to compete with Lovelace, I think. And while the 4080 performance is nice, it's just not worth the headache required to fit it in your case and plug in all these bulky adapters. And then you have something from AMD that is stronger in raster, has 50% more VRAM, costs $200 less. I think the 7900 XTX is a solid alternative to the 4090. Like I said, if the 4080 was cheaper, I would recommend that over the 4090 to most people because I actually believe it hits a level of performance most people don't need anything better than. AMD does even better than that and gives you even more RAM. I recommend the XTX at $1,000. It's fine. You can save $600 and get like, I don't know, 80 to 85% the performance of a 4090. Well, having just a lot easier to fit in a case graphics card, skip the 4090, and then the 7900 XT, kind of the same feeling versus the XTX. It's just cheaper and weaker. Although I gotta say this, I am kind of hearing that a lot of reviewers kind of hate the 7900 XT, so don't be surprised if that thing gets bad reviews. I'll have to see the final numbers from a handful of reviewers to make my final opinion on it, and that video will be coming. But right now, yeah, I don't think I would pan the XT. I don't think I would say bad things about the XTX. I think they are priced relative to Lovelace fairly and extra fairly versus the absolutely stupid RTX 4080. And then I guess getting back onto the subject of Lovelace, look, I know some people think that the pricing is decided for the 4070 Ti right now, but from what I'm hearing, it isn't, right? The 4070 Ti, Nvidia will be dumb to make up their mind on pricing until they see RDNA 3 final performance and reviews. And that's when Nvidia is going to make the final decision on pricing. But people shouldn't be entirely shocked if they do choose to do $900. And if they do, I don't know. It'll just be another slap to the face of gamers. If the 4070 Ti is priced at $900 with the performance you're seeing on screen, I am going to think it's as bad as the 4080 16GB. It's the same thing. It's just woefully overpriced for the level of performance, even if the performance isn't on itself terrible. And if it's like, $600, then it'll be great, but I don't think it will be. And no, I don't think DLSS 3 makes up for it, which you'll notice I didn't do any DLSS 3 testing for this video. And the reason is this. I read online that Mountain Blade Bannerlord was going to get a DLSS 3 update, but it just hasn't yet. And I don't want to download, buy and download Spider-Man or Cyberpunk or some other game I don't regularly play. I play Mountain Blade Bannerlord a lot, and that game or any other game I play regularly on PC, those are the games I want to test with DLSS 3. Not some early game that Nvidia hand-selected because it probably looks extra good due to some engine issue in the game. I will do a DLSS 3 video when I have games that I play regularly that get that update so that I can just jump in and go, does this feel different? That is when I will talk about DLSS 3. But the fact that I haven't used it for this video should tell you I don't see it as a real factor yet. It's not in enough games for me to say that it's worth buying a 4070 Ti, for example, for like $900 over a 7900 XT. Again, if that's what they price the 4070 Ti at, which if they price it. Let's start talking about what I think the fair price is for each of these graphics cards I've been talking about today. 4090, 4080, 7900 XTX, 7900 XT, and 4070 Ti, because I've seen a lot of people say things like, in some reviews, I've seen some reviewers go, oh, we're going to say this is a good card, and if it's overpriced, that's not always bad. It's like, pricing makes the card. New generations are always better than old generations. The pricing is what defines if it's worth buying. And I think the 4090's performance justifies a price between like $1,600 and $1,800 right now. I actually do. Nvidia has managed to make a flagship that so humiliates every resolution people regularly game at. You'd have to go to 8K to actually stress this card, that I think you're getting a premium product. If you're going to use your graphics card for work, where time is money, or you're a rich gamer, the 4090 delivers in a way that the 3090 never did. Now, the 4080, it's a complete joke above $1,000. Full stop. Don't be a fucking idiot and buy this oversized, overpriced graphics card. It would almost be okay at like $1,000, but that's it. That's all there is to say. And don't get me wrong, I think that the level of performance the 4080 brings you could be called 80 class. You know, there's been weaker 80 cards before, like the GTX 980, that was, you know, barely beating last gen, the 700, the 780 Ti by a tier. That's kind of what the 4080 does. It beats the 3090 Ti by about a tier, just like the 980 beat the 780 Ti by about a tier. But the 980 didn't double the pricing of like previous generations. So that is what I think of the 4080. It could be an 80 class card. It could be a decent card, but it needs to be smaller and it needs to be $1,000 or less. Anything over that, I just could never recommend it. And then there's the 4070 Ti. Well, if I thought the 4080 was dumb at $1,200, I think the 4070 Ti will be dumb at $900. Equally as dumb, a massive slap in the face to gamers. You know, below $800, actually below $750 is when it becomes kind of okay. Again, it'd be like a $1,000 4080. Look, if the 4070 Ti is $750, it's bringing you more performance than the price increase it's bringing over the 3070 Ti, and it uses a lot less energy. I can understand why they charge more if they're giving you way more performance and less power usage. But unless they do that, I don't like the 4070 Ti. And then comes in the 7900 XTX and XT, which, yeah, I think they're fair for the price. They don't raise the price over previous generations. At least the XTX doesn't over the 6900 XT. And it brings you a lot more performance. At $1,000 or less, the XTX is a solid enthusiast graphics card. And at $900 or less, I think the XT is about equally worth getting because it's still kind of overkill in 4K. Although, again, I do think the 900 XT, the 7900 XT, would be a very well-received card if it was like $750 or $800 and just called the 7800 XT. And I think a lot of reviewers are going to point that out and not like the graphics card, but I'm willing to say that compared to everything else, it's okay, but it could have been better. And I guess that's really all I have left to say in this video. The 4090 is in a class of its own right now. AMD has stronger cards coming, but below the 4090, I mean, AMD's basically matching Nvidia or beating them in performance at every tier. And from what I'm hearing, RDNA 3 costs less to make than Lovelace. So AMD can get into a bit of a pricing war below the 4090. And it's really food for thought moving forward in this generation as we await Navi 32 and like 4070 and 4060 graphics card launches, because I think AMD just has a manufacturing cost advantage, and below the 4090, Nvidia doesn't really have a performance advantage anymore. And yeah, that's about it. That's all I'm going to say for this video. I'll have more leaks coming out over December regarding supply of RDNA 3, regarding Intel releases and Nvidia releases next year. So definitely make sure you're subscribed to the Moore's Law is Dead YouTube channel and ring the bell button so you don't miss a flurry of leaks coming out. I actually just leaked on Twitter the i9 13900KS release date, so go check that out as well. And if you have the extra money, consider supporting Moore's Law is Dead on Patreon. We'll get early ad-free access to Broken Silicon, the ability to ask me and Dan and guest questions, access to Die Shrink. There will be another Die Shrink coming out next week that only patrons get access to. And I've got a special guest coming next week that only patrons get to ask questions of. So all of that is there. If you can spare the $2, $4, or whatever amount, $2 or $4 a month or something to support us, we cannot do this without our patrons. But otherwise, to everyone else, no matter what, you made it this far, thank you for watching.